Disclaimer: we will be referencing other content creators in this video. We'd like to stress this is to further emphasize and strengthen the arguments we have made. It is in no way a complete endorsement of the people referenced or everything they have said and done. Thank you for listening. In 2023, Congress.gov published a report titled Instances of Use of United States Armed Forces Abroad, 1798 to 2023. According to Geopolitical Economy Report, the total number of military interventions by the US is over 469. It has been 3 years since then, and unfortunately, the number has only increased. The Iraq War was particularly disastrous. Anywhere between hundreds of thousands to even over 1 million deaths have been recorded in over a decade since it began in 2003. The city of Fallujah was poisoned and led to a mass crisis of birth defects. In an article by The Nation titled, The Children of Fallujah, the Medical Mystery at the Heart of the Iraq War, Laura Gottesdiener writes, Fallujah's children became a topic of concern at tribal meetings and in the Provincial Doctors Union. Many residents suspected that the major American offensives against the city might have had something to do with the deformities. The second offensive, which began in early November 2004, was the deadliest battle of the entire US war in Iraq, a 6-week siege that killed thousands of Iraqis and dozens of Americans and left much of the city in rubble. But these suspicions were kept quiet. Outside people's homes, just beyond the iron front doors, United States Marines patrolled the streets, and residents said that they feared the United States wouldn't respond kindly to insinuations of having sparked a public health crisis. This horrific situation leads us to note that many left and liberal YouTube channels have been rightfully educating their audiences about the genocide in Palestine by the settler colonial apartheid state of Israel, largely funded by the US. But it seems the horrors that were wrought upon Iraq and its people by the US no longer matter to these same political commentators. Why? Well, because they're now platforming and defending unrepentant combat veteran Graham Platner, who is running as a candidate for the Maine Senate. As a quick aside before we continue, we hope you can watch the 4 videos we've linked in the description alongside ours for similar perspectives and more information. We believe this whole situation should be taken much more seriously, as we're both bewildered and disappointed by the dismissal and downplaying of these very real criticisms. Now, let's note the issues with Platner and why it really matters. Possibly the most talked about controversy was his Nazi Totenkopf tattoo, which he had for 18 years. Unfortunately, most people have been duped into believing that he didn't know what it was, but this simply is not true. From the CNN article titled, New Evidence Undercuts Senate Candidate Platner's Claims That He Didn't Know Tattoo Was Nazi-Linked. Quote, using his longtime Reddit handle, P. Hustle, the former Marine infantryman and future Democratic Senate hopeful also argued in a 2020 online discussion that SS lightning bolt tattoos were a culture marker within Marine Scout sniper units, not an expression of white supremacist ideology. When the commenters in the 2020 thread described the lightning bolts as a Nazi or racist symbol, Platner dismissed the criticism, writing that outsiders have no idea what they're talking about, and added, I will be sure to inform the black guys I know with bolts they're Nazis now. CNN also spoke with an acquaintance of Platner from more than a decade ago who said Platner spoke about his tattoo resembling a Nazi symbol. A second person told CNN that they had learned of the tattoo years ago from the acquaintance, who told them that Platner had described it as a Nazi-style design. End quote. He had a Nazi tattoo on his chest for almost 2 decades, knew what it was, but made many of you believe he didn't, and only got it covered in late 2025 after information about the tattoo went public. This fact alone not making people uncomfortable is truly wild. The tattoo, rightfully, should be concerning, but the main crux of the issue here is Platner's history as a combat veteran which he has shown no remorse for. Platner was not someone who signed up once, came back, and realized what he did was wrong because of the harm to civilians in the countries they live in. No. He went back for more, multiple times. He was in Iraq 3 times, and his 4th deployment was in Afghanistan. He was deployed to Fallujah and was a guard at the Abu Ghraib prison, infamously known for its torture and brutality. When there was an attack on the prison, he said to the New Yorker, "That was my first real taste of combat."
Media excusing, rationalizing, reframing. Even when North Star Radio publicized the New Yorker article describing Platner's time at Abu Ghraib prison, many leftists were continuing to defend him in our replies, explaining that he only defended the prison from outside attacks and technically didn't participate in the torture. Your Honor, I was simply an SS guard. I never actually fired my weapon.
And then, when he was 34 in 2018, he went to Afghanistan for 6 months through the private military contractor Constellus, which was formed via a merger of Triple Canopy and Academy, formerly known as Blackwater. Yes, that Blackwater. The same Blackwater that committed the Nisour Square massacre in Iraq in 2007, over a decade before Platner joined. Reading the Wikipedia page alone regarding this incident is harrowing. In an article by the late Jeffrey Evangelos for Central Maine, quote, "But rather than take responsibility for his military adventures, including his association with the war criminals Blackwater, he says this, in defining his campaign for US Senate, in describing his opponents and the military, to know it's coming from the same political establishment that frankly made me go fight these wars in the first place is like doubly infuriating. It's like, you made me go. Like, I volunteered to go do this stuff. You sent us off. You took advantage of us. You took advantage of our patriotism. Nobody made you go, Mr. Platner. You joined. There is no draft. You joined knowing full well that the Iraq War was shrouded in lies at a cost of 200,000 innocent civilians and 500,000 Iraqis. Then you decided to double down and went to work for a mercenary army, Blackwater, as recently as 2018, whose employees were guilty of war crimes. You should have known this, Mr. Platner. This information should have informed your decision regarding joining this mercenary army." End quote. In the same sentence, Platner says, "You made me go," and "I volunteered." As Jeffrey rightly stated, nobody made him go. He chose to. So, repeatedly returning to the military and then joining a PMC well over a decade after does not show signs of so-called growth and change that people keep droning on about. Heck, as recently as 2020 in a now deleted Reddit post, Platner answered the question, "Why did you enlist in the Marine Corps?" by replying, "Wanted to have an adventure and kill some people. Joined up in 2004, did Fallujah and Ramadi, and managed both. Hell of an excellent experience." His constant centering of US soldiers as victims instead of the civilians of Afghanistan and Iraq should be of concern to you. We need to learn to bring back basic human decency and kindness, to be consistent in anti-racist principles, instead of allowing constant shameful behavior and excuses to appeal to selfishness and ignorance. Education of the masses is a constant struggle that should not be abandoned. We cannot truly progress as a people if we're constantly willing to excuse the direct or indirect dehumanization of millions of people across the global south. This is not progress. This is reactionary. To go even further, Platner is also not anti-imperialist by any stretch of the imagination. His campaign website uses the phrasing, "pointless wars," instead of being anti-war entirely or even using the term imperialism. And he is centering US soldiers as the primary victims of these so-called pointless wars. His campaign promises also include addressing the recruitment crisis, as well as the waste and corruption in the Pentagon. Platner also promises to tirelessly work to rebuild the American military and close the massive shipbuilding gap. This website has been up for months now with no change. What about any of this drivel screams anti-war or anti-imperialist to you? Seriously, who still thinks this? It's right here in broad daylight for you to read. It's not even hidden. Again, absolutely no mention of Iraqi or Afghan civilians that were harmed or killed. None. So how could Platner have addressed this and shown any change he may have made since his military service in a more positive manner? We can look to others who served in the US military for answers. In a 2016 article by Rory Fanning on Truth Out called "Veterans Against the War," 11 Perspectives on Ending U.S. Imperialism. There are at least 2 veterans in this piece who clearly recognize the problem. Ross Caputi from Boston says, I think we need to have a moral revolution in this country that totally restructures the way we think about the use of military force. Imperialism is deeply entrenched in our culture. Our perceived right to use violence in other people's countries is never questioned, and it should be. But even within the progressive community, opposition to our foreign policies is too often framed in terms of domestic costs. I think we need to change our moral culture from one of self-righteousness and self-interest to one of solidarity with our victims. Matthew Ho, a member of Veterans for Peace, says, how do we prevent a repeat of the last 15 years? I find that to be a very difficult question to answer. The United States and its people, at least the white ruling classes, have always been an expansionist and imperialist. The notion that the United States was an isolationist nation up until the 20th century is nonsense. We didn't have to have an empire overseas because we were building one through genocide and slavery across the North American landmass. So I don't see anything in our history that allows me to say, this needs to happen as it did then. Since returning home from the military, my greatest frustration has to be the hero worship that we as veterans are feted with. It is unthinking, reflexive, and Orwellian. It is grounded in ignorance, and the enthusiasm with which I find it so often expressed seems to come from a place of mistaken guilt for not having served, or from a place of slavish obedience to the cultural and societal dictates that help sustain our military and industrial profligacy and our immoral wars overseas and at home. One of these individuals is even confirmed by the article to have served in the Iraq War, same as Platner. He was able to recognize the problem and repent for his part in it, so why can't Platner? Or more accurately, why won't Platner? If he has truly changed and recognized the wrong he did during his multiple tours in the military, instead, he proudly wears combat veteran on his X bio, and his campaign platform, as we've just evidenced, is pro-imperialist. Platner didn't come from a poor, working-class background. His family is wealthy, and he definitely didn't need the money, which is a horrid excuse anyway, and we'll get to that in a bit. In fact, quoting from this GQ article by Ross Barkin titled, Marine-turned-oysterman Graham Platner is ready to fight Trump. Will MAGA men join him? Quote, he does not hail from a line of oyster farmers. His father, Bronson Platner, is a prominent local attorney who ran an unsuccessful campaign for city council in Ellsworth, and his mother, Leslie Harlow, is a popular restaurateur. Platner's grandfather, Warren, Bronson's father, was a leading modernist architect who designed interiors for the Ford Foundation and, most famously, Windows on the World, the restaurant that sat atop the Old World Trade Center. At the time of his death in 2006, according to the New York Times, he was working on a new shopping center in Greece. End quote. Speaking of socialism, Platner himself basically laughs at being called progressive and publicly declares he isn't a socialist. In a statement to Politico, he said, I made dumb jokes and picked fights, but of course I'm not a socialist. I'm a small business owner, a Marine Corps veteran, and a retired shitposter. When talking to Semaphore, Platner stated that he did not consider himself a progressive. I get a chuckle out of a lot of people in the media trying to pigeonhole me into this weird progressive bucket, especially considering I'm a small business owner and I have a gun safe that is, well, full of guns, Platner said. We'll now move on to some more of his actions on social media and other platforms. In an article from the Main Monitor written last year, quote, Platner responded to a 2013 post on Reddit entitled, What is one question you have always wanted to ask someone of another race? Writing, Why don't black people tip? He worked as a bartender at Tune In on Capitol Hill, where he was a guest bartender last month. I work as a bartender, and it always amazes me how solid this stereotype is, he wrote. Every now and again, a black patron will leave a 15 to 20% tip, but usually it is between 0 and 5%. There's got to be a reason behind it. What is it? That same year, he also responded to a post about underwear designed to prevent sexual assault, saying people should take some responsibility for themselves and not get so effed up they wind up having sex with someone they don't mean to. End quote. And while Platner's comment history should trouble you, there's even more recent issues to note. Platner made an appearance on the program Valhalla VFT, run by Nate Kornachia, a former Green Beret who promotes anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Platner said it was, quote, an absolute pleasure being on his show. One of the most common and honestly nauseating and tiring responses we get is, "You're just purity testing," or "Don't let perfect be the enemy of good," or "This is why the left loses," or some other nonsense. For one, he isn't even good in the first place, and for two, purity testing is the right thing to do. This argument doesn't work anymore. For people who are rightly anti-Platner, just say to these people, purity testing is good and necessary, because it is. It's about having standards and boundaries. It's about not crossing a line, and Platner has crossed many. It's not about asking for perfection. Nobody actually expects a perfect candidate, and nobody said any candidate should be perfect. This is just assumed because there isn't any valid counter-argument to the facts of Platner's history and behavior. In this instance, he has raised so many red flags, with some more egregious than others, like repeatedly going back to Iraq in the early 2000s, and then working for Constellus in 2018, that should be more than enough to just say no to him holding any government position. Again, purity testing is necessary and often good. It's not about finding perfection, it's about having moral and ethical standards. The real reason the Western left loses is actually because it's not sufficiently socialist or anti-imperialist. It leaves behind Black and Indigenous people of color and Global South victims of US imperialism repeatedly. The Western left loses because it deludes itself into falsely thinking there's no other option when there is. They just decide to participate in and contribute to making sure other options aren't viable by continuously voting Democrat every election. People cannot say for years on end that third parties aren't viable while simultaneously ensuring they're not viable in the first place by refusing to organize with and vote for them. Work to make them viable instead of continuing to make sure they're not. Don't sit back, throw up your hands and say, "This isn't possible." How many more election cycles will you keep saying this to yourself while you're actively part of the problem? So what about Susan Collins or Janet Mills? The idea of, "Oh, well, this politician is worse," or "we must choose the lesser of two evils," is a foolish argument to take in support of any candidate, let alone Platner, who clearly does not fit the description of better given his alarming history. A popular modern talking point among self-labeled progressives, especially white leftists, is that harm reduction is necessary in our electoralist system and is better than outspoken criticism of a candidate's failings and bad choices. Let us be abundantly clear. Harm reduction has always been, at best, the bare minimum for us to seek out. It is a band-aid on a bullet wound. Objecting to the repeated push of the Democratic Party to put the most center-right candidate at the forefront of discussion is not throwing away your vote. Those who did not vote for Kamala Harris in the recent presidential election due to her terrible positions on imperialism and genocide were right. And to suggest these what-if scenarios of harm reduction and the dangling potential of holding Donald Trump and his cronies accountable, something the Democrats refused to do for the 4 years they controlled the executive branch between his two terms, is simply an argument in bad faith. Deflecting for the Democratic Party and their terrible candidates is not your job, and is frequently done to dodge holding anyone accountable for the mistakes of our electoral system. We must remind you that both the Democrats and the Republicans are fully in support of the interests of capital, and with that comes weak, ineffective stances on imperialism. Even relatively good social policy is not a strong point for the modern Democratic Party. Do we have to remind you that they had full control of the federal government during Obama's first term? And yet they constantly made concessions on policy to the right, refusing to codify Roe v. Wade into law, endless concessions on the Affordable Care Act, etc. The same is true of 2021 to 2023, when Democrats controlled the House and Senate under Biden. Some of you might say, but line struggle, it's only right-wingers who are mad about him. This is simply not true. We have cited many of those on the left who are upset with Platner. Beyond the videos that were linked, There have been others like Noah Samson and Sean DeBlack who have openly been critical and skeptical of him. We have also cited those handling his same error of military service to imperialism far better than he has. Not showing actual remorse for his actions is the problem many of us have with Platner. His pro-imperialist stances, stated plainly on his campaign website, should also be a problem for anyone who would claim to be a socialist. If you didn't know already, being a socialist by definition is about being both anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. And even if all the opposition work that is being done against him was by so-called right-wingers, as if the Democrats aren't right-wing themselves, they are, what matters is whether the content is true, and it is, and that's what we should be opposed to. Right-wingers taking control of a specific issue, be it cultural, economic, or social, does not mean we shouldn't address it. Besides, if we should be worried about right-wingers, there is the real issue of Platner himself being one. He recently reposted anti-Semitic and homophobic individuals and went so far as to even appear on a right-wing talk show. If anything, he seems to be more aligned with them than with the left. So what do you expect him to do for work, you may ask? Anything else? Let's get some numbers first to be as transparent as possible with factual data. As of March 2025, according to Pew Research, 1.3 million people are in active duty in any U.S. military branch, with the majority being in the Army. The adult population, as of 2020-24, according to the data center of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, is over 266 million, out of a total of 340 million people in the U.S. So to estimate, that would make the amount of people in the military only 0.4% of the adult U.S. population, and only 0.3% of the entire U.S. population. Let's push this even a step further. As of January 2026, according to Statista.com, over 161 million people are employed, with 135 million full-time and 26 million part-time. That makes 0.8% of the employed population in the military. Here's the point. In every single instance, the military doesn't even make 1% of the population, and they aren't the overwhelming majority, not even close. So let's repeat our answer to the question, what else was he supposed to do? Again, it's anything else. Community colleges and trade schools exist. Online certificates exist. There are over 33 million businesses in the US. It's not as hard as Emma Vigeland is falsely making it out to be. Accountant, bookkeeper, receptionist, waiter, teacher, clerk, data entryist, data analyst, technical writer, marketer, director, artist, editor, analyst, administrative assistant, landscaper, plumber, electrician, car mechanic, graphic designer, web designer, teacher, driver, tutor, technician, chef. Heck, look up the A to Z of job titles for goodness sakes. He was temporarily a bartender. That's also an option. Shocking, I know. Please stop acting like people who work in the most egregious of industries do not have any other choice. They absolutely do, and you're deluding yourself into defending something you absolutely should not be. Yes, it is that simple. Please do not call yourself anti-racist or anti-imperialist if you're grasping at straws to be okay with people working in the military-industrial complex, be it in the military itself or at somewhere like Boeing, Lockheed, or Raytheon. There are options. Take them. No, your bills and healthcare do not matter more than the existence and livelihood of millions of people in the global south. Do not be selfish, be principled, and act upon those principles. The world will not change if you refuse to as well. We can all take steps to improve. It's the bare minimum. So what exactly are we suggesting that you should do, you may ask? While we are not sole proponents of electoralism, or sole arbiters of right and wrong, we must stress that properly vetting and critiquing any candidate is essential for those who would choose to participate within the electoralist system currently in place in the US and other Western countries. Simply looking at a party tag on the ballot is not enough, especially within a party primary. Examining a candidate's platform and voting history where available is essential. Graham Platner is not the only questionable candidate running in the primary against an establishment Democrat. There are other examples of this happening throughout the rest of the country, and it has been happening for many, many years. Take examples like Kyrsten Sinema, John Fetterman, and Joe Manchin. They ran on a supposedly progressive ticket, but once elected, they sided with large corporate and imperialist interests. Remember when Kamala Harris dismissed pro-Palestine activists in the 2024 general election? Remember when she said she wouldn't do anything different from Biden? Remember when she said she would ensure America would have the most lethal fighting force in the world? Remember when she started palling around with the Cheney family? Well, you see how that turned out. This idea amongst liberals and self-labeled progressives that voting Democrat down ballot is the answer is clearly not working. It is essential to organize with and vote for third parties, not the Democrats and the Republicans. Seek out other institutions within your communities. Engage in mutual aid and support. Find organizations that help workers, people with disabilities, migrants, racial and ethnic minorities, and LGBTQ+ groups, and, if you're able, volunteer time and support to these groups. If none exist and you have the skills, abilities, resources, and/or time, be a leader in your community and start them. The Western left will never gain any traction in the imperial core if it does not have the support of marginalized groups. It is crucial that you organize within your community if it is safe and possible for you to do so. Engage with your friends and relatives. Engage with the people in your community who are uncertain or barely making it by. Engage with your coworkers, your classmates, and your neighbors. That engagement is how we can actually build a socialist movement, not voting for the Democrats and then scolding people who don't. Don't shame marginalized and vulnerable people for not voting. Shame politicians and other people in power instead for not adequately representing their constituents. Shame and criticize those we elected for not sticking to their promises and selling their souls to corporate and imperialist interests. Criticize and hold accountable influencers and content creators you like for uncritically supporting these politicians. Be angry at lobbyist groups and corporations. It is the reactionary, capitalist system that is to blame here. A system designed to make the majority of people's lives worse and worse for the benefit of the ruling class. They are the ones at fault, not the most marginalized victims of that system. YouTubers and streamers, those like Hassan Piker, Kyle Kulinski, Crystal Ball, Ryan Grimm, Emma Vigeland, Sam Cedar, Francesca Fiorentini, and so on and so forth, they're all anti-communist radical liberals or social democrats who believe in Democrat Party entryism.
And yell at me about Graham Platner being like a baby killer or whatever the fuck. I don't care anymore. I don't give a shit. I'm Team Platner, okay? Yikes. People like Platner are the people who killed 100+ little girls in Iran. I'll never support that. Yikes. Yeah, I don't care, man. Yeah, you got it. Well, luckily you don't have to vote for him. You can vote for, illegally vote for Pills Mafia.
This is not what US leftists who genuinely believe in socialism should be agreeing with or engaging in politically. These people deserve criticism. They are not gods. They are not your friends. They don't know you. Remember that. It's just a fact that they are absolutely wrong on this issue, among many others, and should be criticized by their audiences for it, not be defended no matter what. Again, they don't know or care about most of you, regardless of what you've deluded yourself into thinking. They are flawed human beings like the rest of us, and are not more important than people of the global south who have suffered tremendously due to decades of US imperialism. Take a step back and humble yourself on this issue. Detach yourself from them, demand better from them, and demand better from traditional media outlets. Demand better from the politicians who have been elected to represent your interests. Demand better from political hopefuls like Graham Platner, who are open about the fact that they are not socialist and are unrepentant about their contributions to imperialism and destruction across the global south. We can demand better, and we should.